Well, thanks for the invitation to present some of the work on One House, Many Nations. I think the way that we've structured the presentation, we're going to spend just a couple of minutes introducing ourselves, the three of us who are on the call from the One House, Many Nations teams, and then we're gonna jump through three different aspects of the work. There are a lot of different things that happen with this project over different spaces with different people in different communities. And like I said, we're only three people. Alex Wilson was going to join us, and unfortunately, she was not able to. So my name is Jacob Mans. I'm an architect. I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota in the School of Architecture. I also teach construction and building technology at a community college. So I'm very interested in this kind of intersection of design, education, making and construction, and how all of those different things come together to provide affordable housing solutions for people. And the One House, Many Nations project for me over the last 6 or 7 years has been kind of hugely influential in the way that I think about building and working with communities. So that's a little bit about my background. I'll hand it over to Jason.
Yeah, good afternoon. Name's Jason Sirkin. I'm an intern architect with the OAA. I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. I'm calling in from Treaty 6 territory, northern Saskatchewan today. I've been a collaborator with One House, Many Nations since I think about 2018. And I guess I'm working on project coordinating with Mylan on a kind of sister grant that's running through Making the Shift. We'll show some of that work a little bit later on. But yeah, my work is mostly in northern remote housing, off-grid living, and kind of land-based learning. So with that, I'll pass it off to Mylan to introduce himself.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Mylan Tatusis, PhD candidate in the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. Also one of the coordinators alongside Jason with One House, Many Nations, where we're basically just coordinating and keeping things on track and as organized as we possibly can. And yeah, much of my work looks at colonialism and decolonization on the prairie. And obviously housing does sort of fall into that category. So that's who I am.
Okay, well, I'll kick it off then. And what I want to try and do in the 5 or 6 minutes that I'll be talking is provide a little bit of background and history, at least as long as I've been involved in the One House, Many Nations project, and talk through some of the early kind of design and community work that we were doing, look at an initial prototype house that we did a few years back, and talk about some of the lessons learned from that experience and working with that community and the ideas that we've been thinking about around technology and having that be a factor in providing more affordable housing solutions. And then that work kind of will dovetail into what Jason will be talking about. So my work started directly with Alex Wilson, who's an amazing community leader with the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. She's a member of that community and contacted us in 2015, 2016 to take a look at what was then emerging as the One House, Many Nations campaign as a part of the Idle No More movement. And we were looking at ways of trying to kind of utilize and work with the community on local resource utilization, working on smaller building footprints, tiny houses, and how we could combine a kind of series of smaller design solutions and more locally sourced labor and materials to make housing more affordable. And I think one of the most important pieces of this and doing this kind of work is the process and making sure that you're engaging the right voices in this. And this is an evolving thing that we're trying to learn. The initial designs that we were doing, we did a few years ago. We went up to the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. We met with community members. We provided a platform and a space to talk about what housing was, not only what the home should be, but how people want to live together in a community and how the building should work together. And really try to understand what different people's ideas of housing could be, and not just us as architects or engineers, providing a set of solutions that we think we might know what the right answer is, but really trying to try and understand the solutions that people have been working with and living with for millennia, and to incorporate those ideas back into a contemporary way of building. So these are just some drawings from that workshop that members from the community have been working on. All kinds of ideas about centralizing community around a hearth, different ideas about modularity and prefabrication. I mean, things that kind of are very, very cultural, as well as things that are very much kind of technology and assembly driven, all kind of coming together through these community dialogues. And then translating these community ideas into something that we could talk about actually building and how that might work and how it might translate into to technical systems, and then taking those ideas again and representing them to the community and showing, how these different technologies would play out, how they might reconfigure and think about some of the concepts that we had been talking about, combining modular prefabricated components with other local site built elements to make something that's kind of customizable. So the community not only has a part in building it, but has a part in designing and kind of owning that design idea. And one of the projects that we did spend a lot of time working on was this prototype housing unit that we built and showed in Toronto, and I think it was 2017. We got some funding from the University of Minnesota's Grant and Aid program, and Alex and the One House Many Nations team build this unit in Toronto. And the idea behind it was to create a series of kind of modular utility spaces that would activate a set of kind of simple livable volumes, small boxes. So the triangles in this diagram contain the systems for the house, and the other small boxes were a kind of living room space and a small bedroom off of a kitchen. So this combination of simple, locally sourced, ideally material solutions for the living spaces, and then a little bit more high-tech component that's manufactured someplace off-site that you could do in that environment to kind of deal with some of the issues of building with remote communities or in places where you don't have as much skilled trade labor to facilitate that type of construction. And this is, just some images of what the unit looked like as we built it up in Toronto. And not only, again, just always kind of thinking back about, one house could be this, it could have this kind of an impact and a solution for one person, but always trying to go back and think about how these units might aggregate into kind of community spaces, and sort of from the beginning trying to have this idea of a community or a village coming out of the One House Many Nations project, which, some of the work that Jason has been doing over the last couple of years is definitely moving that forward now with the stuff being built up there this year. And I just want to leave this with some lessons learned, and I'll hand it over to Jason. We built something, we prototyped it, we tested an idea. We did that at a small scale, at a fast pace, and we learned a lot. We're not moving forward directly with that set of solutions where we have 3 little boxes attached to 2 bigger boxes. We realized that we could take that system and refine it and kind of learn from the process of building it. And we're now working on a different kind of utility core solution where all those systems are consolidated into a single kind of volumetric utility core package where everything is in one modular piece that you could deliver to site and then build the home around. And that's been a huge advancement. And that's one of the things that we've been working on moving forward with the idea that you have this kind of centralized element that communities could share. So we don't have to recreate the wheel every single time that we develop and design a housing solution, but it also doesn't predetermine the overall form of whatever house a community wants or an individual wants. Different people come from different environments. They have different resources and housing traditions. And we're looking at trying to find ways of standardizing some universal component of the house, but then also allowing that to activate a range of different housing solutions for individuals. One project that I'm going to kind of use to transition between Jason and I is this project called the Muskrat Hut. And there are probably pictures of Jason in this presentation somewhere. Jason came to the University of Minnesota and helped me lead a workshop. But moving away from the kind of housing project as one side of One House Many Nations and into an educational space is something that I think connects the 3 of us on this call. So I wanted to share a little bit about this. The Muskrat Hut is a project that we produced. Alex, myself, and Jason helped lead a group of community members across seven communities, and from working in the US at the University of Minnesota and up in OCN. The idea is building elements that facilitate land-based education as well. So the Muskrat Hut is a small portable piece of infrastructure that a community can use to get people out into the landscape and kind of teach in a different way. It's also an opportunity, again, to kind of bring people together to design something collectively and kind of see that vision being realized. So here are some diagrams of the Muskrat Hut. It's a small portable bathroom, sauna, shower space with a outdoor kitchen off of the back side of it that you can kind of take and use to set up a base camp and do work on the land. And here's some images of Jason and I building through the project with the community. Alex Wilson, who's not here, but deserves a ton of credit for all the work. She's shown in that upper right image with me putting a sink in on the kitchen cabinet there. So I wanted to make sure that you at least, if she's not here, you got a picture of her. So Jason, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So Jacob had introduced that concept of that universal utility core, and we've kind of that concept emerged out of collaboration with One House Many Nations and Jacob and Alex and the communities, and it's kind of been formalized into a architectural project now through IHI, which is like a accelerator funding grant grant that OCN and One House Many Nations put in, and were successful in a very competitive process. So they put their idea forward to receive some funding, and where it's at right now is looking at building 2 prototype units of the Universal Utility Core project in OCN this summer. The first was a rendering of it, the exterior. The second here is a rendering of the interior of this unit. So the concept or idea is developed further into having a feasibility study done, a business case done, and it's moving forward in the community and it's supported. It's so the idea is that there's a core off the back of the house. It's kind of a lean-to that contains all the plumbing, electrical, and mechanical services of the house, kind of all of those important aspects, and that can be pre-manufactured off-site and then shipped to a site and attached to a home. And the home's flexible to respond to like community needs. So this home can be envisioned as like a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or a 3-bedroom home, all supported by a core. So it's in the development and moving into the construction phase kind of this summer. So go to the next slide there. So through making the shift, through another grant, making the shift with One House Many Nations, where our group has been working to provide kind of housing and education for trying to aid in ending like youth houselessness in communities. Mylan can kind of jump in and talk about this as well a bit as we move forward. I'll just kind of introduce, this has been ongoing for a couple of years, and we've been meeting weekly and working through, we're working with 4 different communities on this part of the project. And we're looking at building small homes that are kind of off-grid and sustainable ways to live for houseless youth in communities. We're working with Broken Head Ojibwe Nation and Big River First Nation. We're working up in Yellowknife, and as well as Alex's home community of Opaskwayak. So this is one of the first homes built. It was built by Natana Collegiate in Saskatoon, and the previous slide that we did in community workshops with houseless youth in Big River, and we worked through SketchUp courses and through different kind of design courses, and they were able to provide design input into the design of this space. So this is a picture of the group with many of the youth participants, and here's an interior of it. I don't know, Mylan, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. So the cool thing about making the shift work that we're doing is that these homes are intended to serve, like Jason said, houselessness. Is that one of the key things that we try to identify with this project in terms of working with Indigenous communities is that we have to resituate sort of the landscape we're in, because Indigenous people have access to the land. They have access to their territories in multiple ways. What we don't have access to is a house, like the physical space that we're going to live and function in. So what's really cool about making the shift is that we're offering that. So if you look at even just the view from Braden, the young man who got this house, the view from where he put his house, it's literally a land-based relationship. So in terms of homelessness, we don't really position the work in that way. We position it more in terms of the structural aspect of providing a house for people who have access to a homeland. So that's one of the cool things about, One House Many Nations in general. And I guess even just to take it a step back, One House Many Nations, the initial goal that sort of caused us to branch out in these multiple projects and these multiple perspectives was basically, what do we need to do to build a house? And what is the cost of that house? And how do we get 4 walls and a roof up in an Indigenous community? And as we started to engage that project, we realized that there is multiple barriers, that there's multiple factors that limit the potential for adequate housing in our communities. So we're actively trying to bypass those systems. We're actively trying to mitigate the sort of like a colonial dynamic that's dictating what type of houses we build, what type of materials we have to use. And that's where Jacob and Jason and other architects and even engineers come into play in helping us navigate and bypass, basically the colonial oppression of our communities. And it led us down this path of where we're at today, where we have multiple communities partaking in these multiple projects. One other key aspect with One House, Many Nations is that it's community driven. So even though people like Jason, Jacob, and myself, even though we are coming at it from a very experienced background around looking at the landscape, me in particular, looking at the landscape and the social factors of colonialism, and Jacob and Jason being, the architects and the masters. Like I don't even think I touched a hammer once in these projects, to be honest. I'm sort of like the admin and the theoretical side of things. But one key thing literally is that the community is designing this, that the communities, it's based off their input and it's based off their creations. And that Jacob's slides there were really speaking and highlighting that, we're simply fostering and making a space for what type of homes, what type of houses is a community going to develop. One key thing too, and I guess to take it back to what Jacob was talking about, was that we're identifying that there's multiple times where we'll encounter the same problem. And one of the big problems is literally energy use. And that's why we're really shifting focus to trying to develop that utility core and get that utility core off the ground as quickly as possible, because that would streamline a lot of our projects in these multiple Indigenous communities. So again, like literally One House, Many Nations, and in particular the Making the Shift project, building these homes, it's literally being defined and directed by community. We're just there facilitating the projects from our experience and our backgrounds. I hope that speaks to a little bit about Making a Shift and One House, Many Nations, the topic I was supposed to cover. And if Jason and Jacob want to add anything to that.
I think it was perfect. Thank you, Mylan, for adding that to it. And I mean, we can take questions and kind of go there. We're sort of at our 20 minutes, but I just wanted to say in reflecting on this work, having done it for 6 years, I'm located down in central Minnesota. So, I'm in a different place, working with different communities down here. And one of the things that working through this project and having gotten the opportunity to facilitate some of the workshops and, talk with communities and help them think about these designs, is that there's so much learned through the process of making. Like that is also a way of shaping community. It would be amazing when we would go up and do these 3 or 4 week kind of building sessions, and just the kind of conviviality, the sort of that is the production of the house is an opportunity to create community, which isn't something that I had thought about before. Like you think about the community as coming after you have the homes, but that process of making is such a powerful thing to be thinking about. So, and that shifted a lot for me, how I'm thinking about the way that I'm practicing architecture and thinking about contracting and manufacturing components of housing where I'm at, because I don't just want to think about the object. I want to think about the way that we're making the objects and the detailing of the details. How are we producing? How are we harvesting lumber? And it's so much about education and us learning. Like I'm not the expert in the project. The community knows what they want. They might not have access to some of the resources, or there might be some difficulty in translating some ideas that a community has held for a very long time into a kind of contemporary technological solution. But there's so much knowledge and expertise there that I was not trained on as an architect, having gone through, decade of higher education in that field. So there's like a lesson. I just wanted to say that there's a lesson there for architects, engineers, other professionals who have a set of solutions and have been taught to think about these problems in a very specific way. That stepping back and recognizing that maybe your expertise, maybe you could be a non-expert for a little while and listen to these other voices and have that inform what you think it's been one of the most powerful kind of learning experiences that I've had, ever since I kind of got into this work. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, cool. And then just to sum up that too, is that One House Many Nations, we're a very interdisciplinary team, a very interdisciplinary approach. And like Jacob's saying, is people are coming to the table with various backgrounds, and we're literally trying to get, these physical structures up from, and everyone's bringing a very unique perspective to the team. So we do have a question there. Mike's hands up in the chat.
Thanks. I'd like to thank you guys first for your excellent presentation. And I'm wondering if do you do anything different to build the houses to last a long time? Yeah.
Yeah. So like a longevity question of the actual builds. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think maintenance is something that we need to be really focused on. I mean, just in terms of like some of the detailing, thinking about overhangs on roofs and making sure that you're providing a deep watershed so water's not splashing up against the house, providing a drainage and a ventilation cavity so that if moisture gets into the house, it has a way to work itself back out. We're trying to minimize and kind of think. The first house that we built was a solid wood house. So kind of moving away and thinking about cavity walls, and if a system fails, like what happens with that failure? Like, is it producing an environment for mold and other kinds of things to grow? One of the things that we've been working on a lot with Jason on the utility core is this question of maintenance. So now all of the systems are in this kind of centralized location. We're trying to kind of minimize the amount of distribution that's happening around the home, which we're hoping provides increased maintenance. If the heating unit is in a crawl space underneath the house, that the community's maintenance department doesn't have easy access to coming in and checking that on a regular basis, then that system is going to break down. It's going to cost more money in the long run. But we specifically designed the kind of utility core to have a back entrance. So no matter, if the family member is home or not home, there's kind of a separate lockable entrance. So you can kind of come in, take a look at the mechanical system, make sure it's up and running, just to help facilitate the kind of long-term durability of some of those systems, which, I know, I don't have the exact statistics in my head for the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, but I know an exorbitant amount of resources that could go into the production of new houses is spent on the, retrofit and renovation and upkeep of old homes that are in really, really desperate disrepair. So if we were more conscious about maintenance in the near term, I think that's a big part of the kind of long-term sustainability of building in general.
Yeah. And then just to add off that too, is like one of the biggest encounters, well, I guess like a repeated commentary I heard while working with One House Many Nations in terms of housing is literally mold, right? And like if Jacob, if you want to show just like the village idea and project that we identified earlier on in the design lab, if you want to just bring that slide up. One of the key things we realized is that if we're dealing with overcrowding in communities and there's multiple families in a single home, literally like if someone's taking a shower, there's 8 people taking a shower in one day, that's going to cause a problem in the house in terms of moisture. So literally these community village ideas is a sort of repeated theme that tends to come up in terms of, do we even want the bathroom in the house, or do we want the shower in the house? Because we were, some of these communities were originally village people, like functioned in a community network. So we sort of explored that idea, and like a bathhouse, like whoever said that we needed to have the bathroom in our house? That's just sort of like the Western assumption that was applied to Indigenous housing. Whereas now with the utility core and this village model, we could just, mitigate a lot of the source problems that are causing, the housing problems and the housing degradation currently. So multiple showers in a 2-bedroom home from multiple family members at one specific time of day, of course that house is going to mold. Of course there's going to be moisture problems. So that's an example of how we sort of just try and identify the problem and find those bypasses. Cool.
Kurt, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for this is really an eye-opening presentation, really good stuff here. Now you had mentioned, I believe at one point about talking about attempting or trying to, as an objective, to use local materials as much as possible. And I was just wondering how successful you were with that. And I have done some work in northern Manitoba, or at least studies and discussions, investigations, And there are problems with being able to use, like you have to have stamped wood. It was a big like hurdle that came up in the discussion. So I just wonder where your thinking is, where your successes are, or your hopes and dreams are in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, the question of stamped wood has come up a number of times. I mean, obviously the structures have to be code compliant if you're going to be using, federal sources of money to build them. And the community does have a mill, has had a mill in the past, and we've always wanted to be able to use that material. The material would be fantastic, fine to build with. But that, to Mylan's point, it's like, what are the systems that we're trying to overcome and rethink to be able to facilitate the affordable housing, in remote communities? Like if you're having to ship in stamped lumber, for example, but you have access to local materials and you have knowledge of how that would work, it's the system that's kind of preventing you from being able to do it. And the system is there for good reasons. It's there to, facilitate a certain amount of safety and welfare within these buildings. But I think we got to be looking at that on a more specific basis. And sometimes those generalities are really some of the toughest hurdles to overcome. We did that building. We had the idea of making it out of solid wood. We imagined over time that possibly we could have the production of a solid wood facility, in the community that would be eventually sourcing panels for these houses. I think over time we've kind of moved away from that idea and have transitioned more towards a facility with the work that Jason's doing and the kind of utility core project that we have happening right now, that we would focus on the local production of these utility cores that could be distributed to remote communities, and then try and work individually with remote communities about that local labor material utilization. So yeah, Kurt, it is a challenge. I wouldn't say that we were as successful as we wanted to be. It's definitely like our goal to source the material for the buildings as close to where the building is to minimize our impact and to be able to have a positive, not only minimize, I would say, but to understand the land and have a positive impact through the production of housing. But that's one of the pieces that we're definitely still working through. Jason, do you want to add anything, or Mylan?
One thing to look at, Kurt, is maybe if you start to get into the heavy timber, when we haven't done this on a project yet, but if you start to move into like timber frame as per the building code, I don't quote me, I think it's like anything over 5 inches dimensional starts to move into like a heavy timber, and there's different provisions when you get into heavy timber framing. And I mean, so that maybe is one way to circumvent that, but we haven't tested that yet or really got into that. But that could be one strategy, is to look at timber structure, any other structural wall or element, that is holding that up or is structural, should be, has to be done with stamped lumber and stuff. But one way to maybe, look at employing a bit more local material is that. I know on one project in Saskatoon, we provided like heavy log columns and had a structural engineer visually grade them. As a way to circumvent that is through, an engineer visually grading things, which might not be that helpful in remote communities because that could be difficult too with its own issues. But yeah, it is quite ironic that, like you can buy a bandsaw sawmill for a few $1,000s, be surrounded by trees. And if you want to receive any sort of federal funding or comply to building code for dimensional lumber, you're not allowed to use the trees around you. You have to use trees that are taken from somewhere and then shipped. So you look at it like a global warming and environment and impact, and it's quite odd. Yeah. Like, you look at the old buildings that are built with rough cut lumber that wasn't graded 100 years ago. They're all still standing. I'd like to see how our houses with graded lumber are doing in 25 or 30 years. Right. So there's a bit of irony in it, but have a look at heavy timber and building code and that kind of provision. That might be a way around. Or log building is another way to look at too, but now with new energy codes and we're moving, it's like starting to get quite difficult to do anything actually with solid log walls in terms of insulation values. Still is possible, but it's getting more and more difficult.
Yeah, and then I think this also just like highlights the conversation around the political and economic barriers that simply the task of building a physical structure in an Indigenous community encounters. Like the stamped wood conversation, like Jacob and Jason said, comes up repeatedly, but at the same time, it's right there. And if we're talking about like Indigenous lands and Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous territory, that's technically the community's wood, and it's being shipped to build homes elsewhere. And it's ironic, it's colonial. We identify that, we see that. And if anything, we constantly just bring up the reality that this is unjust and an unfair system, but at the same time, we're still trying to like bypass those conversations. So it's also like a social science question. Like there's definitely like elements of, politics, economics, and even, social relations that play out in one house, many nations that we're constantly having and we're constantly recognizing. There's no shortage of identifying the problems in this work, but we're definitely just trying to bypass them and build a house. Like that's literally the basic tenet of this project was, what do we need to do to get that house up? And we've been doing it for years now, getting those houses up and trying to bypass those colonial problems.